So sometimes your whole future can shift with a knock at the door. How many of you guys have experienced that in your own life? That a knock came at the door and you met somebody for the first time. Or maybe you were given a piece of information that changed things significantly. Or maybe an opportunity was presented to you. And it all started with a knock at the door. And your life was set in a very, very different direction. Anybody have that experience? A knock, or maybe it was a phone call, or maybe it was a text message. It could be a lot of different things. But essentially, something happened. A knock at the door and it all changed. Well, you know, that's how Christmas week began, with a knock at the door. A Roman official came and knocked at the door of Mary and Joseph. And he informed them that there was going to be a census that was being taken throughout the Roman Empire. And that they would have to make a journey from where they were in Nazareth, which is up in the north, all the way down, and actually, we'll see this on this map right here. They were all the way down to Jerusalem, and then ultimately about a 70-mile journey all the way to Bethlehem. Now, Mary was 9 months pregnant. And so they did not have a plan to make this journey. This was not a part of their plan to go down and have the baby in Joseph's hometown. They planned on staying there in Nazareth to be surrounded by family and friends. I mean, doesn't that make sense? But we also know that Mary and Joseph are no stranger to curveballs, if you know what I mean. So they strike out into the Judean wilderness. 70 miles they trek all the way down, of course, cutting over here to the east of the river, all the way down to Jericho and to Jerusalem and to ultimately Bethlehem. They make their way through some really, really treacherous terrain. This is probably what it would have looked like, at least an aerial photo, if you'll go to that next one. This is kind of the terrain that they're working with, that they're walking through. And yes, I did say walking through. If you scour the entire Gospels, there's no mention of a donkey. And so for those of you who are picturing Mary kind of riding on the donkey right next to Joseph, there's no donkey. She was 9 months pregnant, and she was probably walking alongside Joseph the entire way. So they're making their way through terrain like this. And they're carrying quite a burden with them. One can only imagine all that's swirling around in their heads, all that they're feeling inside of their bodies. Can you kind of feel the weight as they make their way? This is one of these caverns that they likely made their way through on their way to Bethlehem. Can you put yourself there for just a moment? I mean, none of us have arrived at Bethlehem yet. We're all on this journey. This is how the week begins. It begins right here. All of the emotional weight, all of the spiritual weight, all of the relational weight that they were carrying through these really pretty majestic canyons. I mean, when you think about Mary, we know a few things about her. She was likely a middle school girl. She was likely around 13 or 14. And middle school girls don't have the best reputation for emotional steadfastness, right? I mean, we oftentimes refer to one of our children's middle school years as the dark time. And then you add that she's 9 months pregnant. I mean, can you even imagine what was going on in her body and in her mind as she carries this child through these canyons? Likely, Joseph is not, he's equally fragile. He had to have a divine intervention for him to even believe what Mary had told him. Probably their relationship was really just kind of trying to heal from all of the, well, craziness, we would just say. I think that's a tame word for what they experienced together. I think they probably were still trying to rebuild some trust, and it takes time to build trust. They're carrying all of this as they make their way through the canyons. Now, consider the spiritual burden. For those of you who have had a child, you've experienced, when they place that child in your arms, there's an incredible inadequacy, right? I remember the first time when Peyton, when he was just born, and they placed that child in our arms, and they kind of give you that whole pat on the shoulder, good luck with that kind of thing. And all of you walk out of the hospital, and you're like, I have no idea how we're going to do this. But I think we would also agree that Mary and Joseph experienced it on a whole different level. I mean, they were raising a Messiah. How do you do that? How do you raise a Messiah? What if you mess it up? I mean, I think even with all of the divine messengers and the wonder of everything that they experienced, there's no doubt that they had to have felt completely overwhelmed by the burden that they carried through those canyons. As I was looking at this picture, I had no idea this is what they were walking through. And I just spent some time this week kind of thinking to myself, okay, if I'm journeying alongside Mary and Joseph, what do those walls represent for me right now? What kind of emotional weight or burden do they represent for me? What kind of spiritual walls or doubts do those canyons represent for me? I think probably a lot of us maybe carry some weight, carry some burdens as we follow the holy couple. So this morning we continue on in our teaching series entitled A Weary World Rejoices. We are a part of a very weary world. I did some research this past week about exactly what were some of, or if not, maybe not the major cause of why we feel so weary. And you want to know? You want to take a guess as to what I found? What's one of the main contributing factors about our weariness right now? Just as a culture, as a society, there's a weariness. Anybody want to take a guess? Busyness, worry, politics. Okay, all right. How about the obvious one? Sleep. Pre-pandemic, I kid you not, this is confirmed by multiple sources. Pre-pandemic, there was about 33% of American adults that struggled with sleep problems, moderate to significant. 78% post-pandemic, 78% of adults in America have sleep problems now. And I'm just gonna be very transparent. I'm one of them. I never had a problem sleeping pre-pandemic. I was always able to go to sleep so easily, but now my sleep is broken. And I go to sleep and I wake up and I have to go back to sleep and I have to figure out ways of not allowing my mind to spin and get me up. I never had that problem before. I also have been experiencing more significant anxiety, and more people are experiencing that. There was something that shifted inside of us, in our minds, in our spirits, that many people are struggling with anxiety in a different way than they did before. And they're trying to manage that. It seems like the weight of life is just a little bit heavier as we make our way through those canyons. I looked over there. And I said, those canyons. So what I want to do is I want to share with you a passage that really means a lot to me, and I've been trying to spend some time with this passage. It's one that I memorized when I was young, and I've never actually taught on it. And so I'm really excited about sharing with you some of my observations today. So this is one of those beautiful passages that you probably have heard multiple times from Matthew 11. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. I don't know about you, but those words are like living water to me right now. And so I want you to just kind of receive them as though Jesus, as this is Jesus speaking, as though Jesus were speaking these words over you today. That they would just kind of pour out over your own spirit, your mind, your heart, where you are today, that you would just receive this. Come to me, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Now, one little insight about this passage, it immediately is supposed to point us to something that happened with Moses. Now, Moses was a really anxious guy. Okay? He was an anxious guy, and he didn't have a lot of confidence in his own abilities. And so he was always kind of calling out to God, asking God to help him, especially in the leadership task of guiding the Hebrew people, perhaps even 1 million people through the wilderness. And God gives him this specific promise. God says to Moses, he says, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. The promise that God gives to Moses is the same promise that Jesus gives to his followers. Do you not think that those people, that the Hebrews, that the Jews that were surrounding Jesus, when he gave them those words, do you not think that they made the connection? They made the connection. They knew that in the same way that God promised rest, presence and rest to Moses, Jesus now is promising presence and rest to them and to you. I found that so powerful to recognize that same promise is ours. But we might receive that, come to me and I will give you rest. But we ask kind of like, well, how does that happen? Okay? So let's make our way to the next part of this. Go back to the, I'm going to come to that in just a second. Take my yoke. Jesus says, take my yoke. Now, yoke is a term that we don't really use a lot right now. Yoke is actually the unique teachings of a rabbi. So every teacher, every rabbi in that day had a unique kind of set of interpretations about the law. They would study the law and all the nuance of the law, and then they would come up with this is what I feel like it's saying. It's their unique yoke. And for some people, their yoke was incredibly heavy. It was oppressive. That the weight of the yoke of following particular rabbis was just horrendous. Now, like religion, the word religion is it means to rebind, so to bind again. And so it was the worst expression of religion. Like religion would make you feel bound up. Okay? And go to this picture right here. How many of you guys have ever watched The World's Strongest Man? Anybody ever watched that? It's really pretty fascinating. These guys are scary. But one of the events is called the yoke walk. And this is what this guy is doing. He has over, I think he has 1,200 pounds. And of course you can see that the weight is evenly kind of distributed across his shoulders. But the yoke walk is you have 30 seconds and you're trying to take as many steps as you can with the 1,200 pounds, as many steps as you can in 30 seconds. That's what the yoke walk is. I mean, and it sounds absolutely insane. And yet, many people are walking through life feeling the weight of a yoke that is so weighed down. And Jesus comes and he says, take my yoke. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. It's almost oxymoronic, isn't it? An easy yoke, a light burden. Jesus invites us to take his yoke, to come to him and to take his yoke. Years ago, I had a spiritual director. His name was Father Adam, just an absolute kindest man, wise man. And he actually made a comment about this specific verse, and he was talking about it. He said, "This is one of the most intimate of invitations, and yet so very few people accept it. Why do so many weary people insist on carrying their burdens alone? Why won't they come? Why won't they come?" And so I want to turn that question around to you this morning as those that might feel like you're carrying a significant amount of weight. And how might we take on a different yoke? How might we approach Jesus? Jesus is inviting us to live a different way, to experience life differently. How might we receive that from him? So again, he comes back and he shares with some more really wonderful insight. In verse 29, he says this, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." So learn about who I am, for I am gentle and humble in heart. I think that there's something about us that we're not sure if we can trust Jesus' heart. Or maybe we don't really feel like we know much about Jesus' heart. So from a biblical standpoint, the heart is the essence of your being. It's not this muscle in your chest. It is the essence of your being. So do we know the essence of who Jesus is? Is Jesus trustworthy? And so he gives two examples, two adjectives about what Jesus' heart is like. And the first one is gentle. So praus is the Greek word. It's used 4 times in the New Testament, and it means something really unique. It says, it means not being overly impressed by one's self-importance. Humble, considerate, and meek. So Jesus, the Christ, the Word made flesh, the transcendent one that John speaks of, that predates, that exists prior to creation. How does he view himself? He has a very, very low sense of his own importance. That Jesus describes himself as a gentle heart. The second is, it actually builds on the first. Tapenos is translated specifically as humble or lowly. So Jesus' heart could be described as lowly, an inner lowliness describing a person who depends upon the Lord rather than himself. That he comes and offers himself, invites us to come close to him as someone who is gentle, who has a low sense of self, not a low sense of self-worth, but a humility, but then a lowliness about his heart. Now, what I hear from this is I hear Jesus being approachable. I think he's trying to break down any barrier that we have from approaching him and receiving what he wants to give us, living the life that he's inviting us into. And I think that is something, when I think about my kids, for those of you guys who are parents or grandparents, probably the most important thing that you want is for your kid to be able to come and talk to you about anything. It would break my heart if my kids felt like they couldn't come and talk to their dad about anything, that I would be approachable in any circumstance. And I feel like that's what Jesus is trying to communicate to us. I love you outside of circumstance, unconditionally. You can come to me and you can receive what I'm offering you. So let me offer you one last little dimension to this. It's a beautiful story. It's actually a legend. They call it kind of a legend, but I think that it has some truth to it. There was a legend about Jesus of Nazareth and his first job. Throughout all of Judea and all around Nazareth, There was a reputation that Jesus of Nazareth had as a yoke maker. He was a master yoke maker. And so we kind of have to imagine people coming and bringing their teams of oxen to come, and Jesus would take significant amounts of time, and he would kind of measure their height and their width and all of the uniqueness of each of the oxen. And then the team would be taken away for maybe a week or 2 weeks, and then they would come back. And then Jesus would have crafted these yokes just perfectly. And he would place them on their shoulders, and he would smooth out the rough edges, and he would make sure that they fit just perfectly for them to be able to do what they are called to do. There are many of us that are walking through life with a heavy yoke, with a sense of weariness about us. And Jesus says, come and take my yoke, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. See, there's something unique about Jesus' yokes. The yokes that Jesus makes, they're always made for two. They're never made for one. They're always made for two. And do you want to know who your yoke partner is? It's Jesus himself. He commits in gentleness and in humility and lowliness to walk alongside each and every one of us and carry the burden, share the burden that we carry. I feel like that is such an absolutely transformative picture of who Jesus is. I pray that you carry that with you throughout the Christmas holidays. Jesus joins us to help carry our weight this morning. Let's bring that little gift with us as we come to the communion table.